Before it's abuse, it's grooming, it's manipulation, and too often it doesn't look like what people expect. Today on Crossing the Line, we're joined by Michelle Denault, a survivor who at 14 was pulled into a manipulative, abusive relationship with her teacher, and she believed that relationship was real for years. Now, she's helping schools, parents, and communities understand how grooming and manipulation actually work and how to stop it before it escalates. This is a conversation about truth, perception, and the dangerous gray areas where harm hides. Welcome to the show, Michelle. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. And once again, I want to tell the audience about my frog voice. I'm having a horrible time with my voice. So if I have to stop for a second, it's just me collecting my voice.
Hey, no problem. So let's start at the beginning. Take us back to your 14-year-old self and tell us what was happening in your life before the abusive relationship started and how it started.
Well, I really consider myself a really normal kid when I was 14 years old. I had a horse. I did horseback riding. I showed my horse. And I wasn't a super popular kid. I hadn't made the cheerleading squad, so I wasn't in that popular crowd. But it was a really small school. So my graduating class only had 44. So everybody had somewhere they fit, if that makes sense. Everybody knew everybody. But I was just your normal kid who liked the most popular boy in the hall. You know, everybody liked the same boy. I would tell you his name, but I don't want to embarrass him here on the podcast. Every girl liked the same boy. And just had a normal family, two parents who'd been married since they were 16 years old. Yes, they would have been married 55 years when my dad passed in November if they'd made it to December. So yes, I always say in my presentation, my mom gave my dad sex for his 16th birthday. And voila, here I came 9 months later. But they no, they made it 55 years. Two parent household, dad who owned a business, very hardworking family, very modest family, just, dinner at night, normal things, went to church with my grandma. I'd been raised in the Catholic Church, normal kid. And I didn't make the cheerleading squad that year. I was really disappointed about that. I also had an accident with my horse. I was on crutches because he'd fallen when we were showing and I had to crutch myself through the hallway. So that was one of those things where that was a struggle. My grandfather died that November. And I've really wondered if that was a part of that connection of what made me a target. He was a very important person in my life, and he died unexpectedly. And I remember my abuser using that sometimes. I remember him saying he wishes that I could respect him as much as I did my grandfather. I mean, he said that at one point when I was older. He brought that up. And I believe it was brought up to my mom that I considered him a grandfather figure, and that's why they believed I was spending so much time with him. So my grandfather died at the middle of my freshman year, but other than that, I just was a normal kid, really.
So tell us how the manipulation and grooming began.
Well, he was the most popular teacher in the hall. He was the football coach. Everybody loved him. And as I was preparing the keynote that I'm doing in June, I wrote that in it. I wrote that into it. He was very charismatic. When he came into a room, everybody wanted to be around him. His laughter could just light up the room. And I can still remember him fondly in that way, which is really difficult for me. But people were drawn to him, is the best way I know how to describe it. And he came up to me and offered me to be his assistant in his office every day at lunch because I hadn't made the cheerleading squad. That was the hook, right? That was bringing me to him, isolating me to him. And things moved gradually from he told me that I had the most beautiful legs he'd ever seen. No, that was one of the first things I can remember him saying to me. But as I tell people in my presentation, the interview process slowly starts to push the edge of the envelope, right? They'll say those things in the beginning that are very basic, like you've got a great smile. And the prettiest legs you've ever seen is absolutely past the envelope, don't get me wrong. But in that moment, the escalation was worse. He came up to me and asked me if I was wearing anything under my dress. And then he would tell me that he would sit me in the front of his class so he could look at my pretty legs. He would just keep pushing the outside of that envelope. And I started spending all of my time with him. I would go to his office to be that personal assistant, but I really just began wanting to be there all the time. I would go into his office before school. I would go into his office at lunch. I would go to his office after school before I had cheerleading practice. And one of the hardest things for me is thinking that I did that. I wanted to be with him. And I tell my audience that the shame and blame of this is I did want it. I did want to be with him. I liked being with him. I didn't think he was hurting me. I enjoyed my time with him. I think that that's one of the things that we really, really miss is at that step 1 through 3, those predators are drawing those kids into that relationship using things that we see as mentoring behaviors. And then by the time they have that kid isolated at step 4, we as adults often put the blame back on that kid. We see them as being the problem. They're going to see that abuser. They must want it. They're the ones that are the aggressor. I heard that a lot. I even heard that he told people that I was the aggressor, that he tried to get me not to come to his office, which absolutely was not true. But we began spending a lot of time together. And the first contact I remember, which during my litigation, they asked me when our first kiss was, and I couldn't remember that. And I was so upset by that. Like, why wouldn't I remember that? That's something you would think you would remember. But the first moment I remember was him reaching up my skirt as I stood beside his desk. And I to this day can remember the look on his face. And now from the lens I have, knowing it was predatory, that look said to me, have I chosen the right girl? I mean, in the frame of mind I'm in now, knowing what I know now, that's what that look said to me. Am I safe to do this with this kid? Or have I chosen the wrong girl? And it escalated from there. Things would happen continually from there, sexual things. When I was 16, he asked me if I would come to his town and go on a motorcycle ride with him. And I did that. And I parked my car at the local Kmart. I know we don't have those anymore, but I parked my car at the local Kmart and we got on his motorcycle. And I thought we were just going for a motorcycle ride. And he slowed down. We were on a 2-lane highway. He slowed down and he pulled off into a grassy area. And once again, at the time, I'm not thinking about him knowing where we are. I'm just thinking this is impromptu, right? He's just pulling off. But later in years, as I had to go through the fact that I was abused, I realized he'd had to have been there before to have slowed down and know where this was because it wasn't even a road. It was like a grassy area that went to the back of a wooded property. And we got off the bike and he started kissing me. And that day he proceeded to teach me how to perform oral sex. And I was a 16-year-old kid. And I know this sounds childish to say, but I'd never even seen a grown man naked at that point. Like I didn't know what to do. And when I explained the emotion to people of that moment, I thought I was in love with him at that point. I truly, truly did. And I believed that being with him was the next step in the love relationship. When I talked to my audience, I asked them, how many of you sit and watch the Hallmark Channel with your girls? You're showing your kids all this love and romance, and that's the next natural step in that love relationship. I even asked them, how many of you watch Days of Our Lives with Bo and Hope, right? I was holding out for a hero, man. He was coming to get me on his motorcycle, and my abuser even had a motorcycle. So how convenient was that? But I tell people that my emotions were so mixed at that moment. I thought I was in love with him. I thought this was what I was supposed to do. I thought this was what love looked like. But at the same time, I was embarrassed that I didn't know what to do and a little unsure of if I'm supposed to be doing this. And when I say embarrassed, I didn't want to look stupid to him. That it's the oddest emotion. Like I didn't want to look like I didn't know what I was doing because I wanted him to want to be with me. I wanted him to be in love with me. As I look back now, as I really look back now, and I think about all of those moments, on my 17th birthday was the first time he had intercourse with me for the first time. And it was in his office and it was on my birthday. And I believe he waited until my 17th birthday because 17 is the age of consent here in Illinois. So he was able to convince me that he hadn't committed a crime because he waited to have sex with me until my 17th birthday. He actually told me that the only thing he could lose his job for was moral turpitude. He pulled a book off of a shelf and told me there was a word called moral turpitude, and he could lose his job according to the ethics of his contract because he was married. And that's why I needed to keep our secret. But as I look back at all those moments, the reaching up the skirt, the oral sex, all of the sexual moments, the having sex with me on my birthday, all of the times I gave myself to him willingly. He had sex with me, intercourse with me, a little over a year in the school building, almost every day, multiple times a day. And I think back on that, and I don't really think that's what I wanted to do. I know that sounds odd, but I don't think I wanted to have sex with him. I don't think I desired him in that way as people look at it. Like people think these are kids consenting to have sex and they're old enough to have sex. I think I did it because I wanted to love him and I wanted him to love me. And I thought that was part of it. I don't think I desired him sexually as I want to have sex with you. And it was an act that I really wanted to do, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. There's so much to unpack there.
There is.
And it's like because I found myself rapidly, taking notes as I went through. I want to ask you, and not meaning to age you, what years did this abuse happen?
85 to 89.
Okay, so exact same time as mine.
Yes.
So I'm looking at this, and it's interesting because you were talking about the shame and the access and the fact that the adult said, oh, you were the aggressor, and he said you're the aggressor.
Yes.
And people
Yes.
are so inclined to say, well, it was the 80s.
Yes.
It still
Yes.
happens like that now. And I think
Yes.
that's something we really need to make clear, because with
Absolutely.
social media and everything else, teachers have so much more access that
Yes.
they can get kids to, I don't want to say teachers, I want to say predators. And
Predators.
so even though it was the 80s and it was a different time, the times aren't that different now.
No. No, and I'm going to be blunt here. This is something I bring up to my audience, and this is whether you're in the 80s or you're in the now. This is the question that I ask my audience. I always hear people say, one of my most unfavorite comments is when a female abuses a male. And the comment is, I wish I had teachers like that when I was growing up. I see that one all the time. And I don't do this as often as I used to because I frankly just don't have time, but I will get on those articles. And my first question is, and I've said it to my audience when they've not wanted to believe a colleague did anything wrong, when they've wanted to say, well, he's a nice guy. Well, he made a mistake. Well, that was back then. Here's all you need to ask yourself as a human being, as an adult. Do you get hot for kids? I mean, when you have teenagers come into your house with your kids, do you look at those kids and think, "Woo, I got to get me some of that"? I mean, is that your first thought with a child? And most people are mortified by that question. And I go, well, why not? And then, it comes out because that's not normal. Okay, well, if it's not normal now, it wasn't normal then. It is not normal for an adult to want to have sex with a kid. We say that for our comfort, not for a kid's safety. And one of the things I point out the most that applies to the 80s and applies to now, I had to raise my hand to go pee when I was 15 years old. If they had a code to teach me how to dress, all of these things are still in place. Our kids have to raise their hand to go to the bathroom. They have to have a note signed to take medication. They can't just leave the building without permission. And they have a code to teach them how to dress. We don't think they're wise enough to get themselves up and get themselves dressed in something appropriate. So how do we ever dare say that a 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old kid knew what they were doing when it comes to an adult having sex with them? It wasn't okay then. It isn't okay now. The acceptance of it was not okay then. And it still happens now. You still see the same cover ups. You still see people looking away. You can go in any comment section and see people make excuses for every abuser. What he did was a mistake, and we should look at all the great things he's done. I just saw that comment last week. Just saw this one this week. She's a great girl, a sweet mother, and I think we need to look into what really happened here. There isn't enough evidence. Maybe the boy assaulted her and is lying. Now, it took me 2 minutes to find the news article that said she'd confessed to sexually assaulting one of her students. But we still have this desire, even now, to say that the abuser must have made a mistake. They didn't do anything wrong. I hate the reference. That was then, this is now. Because even though we know more now, we still aren't doing better now. We truly aren't. And these people have, like you said, more access to our kids than ever.
Yeah.
They are able to access them easier than ever. I was talking to a survivor the other day, and she's reading the text messages between her and the abuser. She's 17 now, and it was between 14 and 16, and he's in jail waiting trial. And she's crying and she's reading me these text messages, and I knew she needed to laugh. So I said, I didn't have text messages. I just had to memorize what my abuser said. We didn't have those kind of things. But all of the things he was saying to her were just identical to pretty much what my abuser would have said. And it's fascinating. And I could say those things back to her. And that gives a survivor a little bit of feeling of I'm not alone, but it also helps them recognize and identify better when they can hear it coming from another survivor. But what really struck me about the messages was she sounded like a 14-year-old kid in the
Yeah.
messages, right? Her language was a 14-year-old kid. But what really struck me was so was his language. But what we need to understand is these people are coming down to the level of these kids. That's how they're manipulating them, grooming them, and isolating them because they're acting like them. This is incredibly intentional. I was fascinated with the way he sounded like a 14, 15-year-old boy instead of an adult male. Use the same references, the same LOL, the same, the same kind of things. He was acting like a kid.
Well, and you talked about the feeling of being in love and that you were in.
Yes.
And there's this wonderful advocate and survivor named Marty Moran, and he has this great one man show that he does. He did it on Broadway. And he always says that it's a kid's job to be in love. Kids fall in
Yes.
love with everything and
Yep.
everyone. And I mean, even when you're little and you just like you love your first grade teacher so much, you just
Yes.
love her, and and it's not a sexual, it's just love, and you love your parents, and you okay, I'm gonna date myself. You love Donny Osmond,
Yes,
and
I love Donny Osmond. I had a poster. I had the poster
oh
behind my
yeah,
Donny Osmond.
and I love the Disney Robin Hood character, and
Yes,
you
yes,
love, love, love. It's a kid's job to be in love. And so even when you're in, high school, you are full of all this love that you want to
yes,
shower somewhere, and a predator finds that and manipulates it. And
yes,
then what happens is, I'm hearing this from you. I know this happened from me, but that's where the shame came from. It's like
yes.
I did go to his house. I
Yep.
did, go to places, and I loved him. And even when I started in advocacy, so I've been doing this since 2002, 2003, we couldn't even talk about the love aspect at first because people couldn't understand. And
Right. They
so
don't.
I had a survivor in Alaska, and she's like, yeah, I loved him. And later on I pulled her back, and I'm like, we got to be really careful because some media is going to like, and now it's much easier, but it's a kid's job to love, and predators totally manipulate that. And I think that's what keeps so many like older survivors, teenagers quiet,
Yes.
because my parents were the first to say, well, you sat there right with him and you defended him. And I'm like, well, I was 15,
And I was a child.
Yeah.
Well, my ride or die friend from back when I still lived in New Berlin, and we were not, that friendship has pretty much dissolved after I filed my lawsuit. But she was my ride or die. You know what I mean? Like I would have thought she would have stood by me through everything. And when I first spoke up and realized I'd been abused, this was her exact statement to me. You were not innocent in all of this. I mean, I even had to hear that from one of my best friends. And extracting that part of this from my body has been horrific. It has been one of the most horrific parts of the healing process. Having to mesh who I thought he was with who he truly was. And I often tell this story to people. I remember in therapy one time talking about this exact thing and how difficult it is for us My abuser would take me to the IHSA football clinic every year, where all of the football coaches from all over the state of Illinois would be. And we stayed in this hotel in Champaign. And we would be in the bathroom, and I tell people he had so much chest hair, he would have to blow it dry or his shirt would get wet when he put his shirt on. And was in a hotel with my husband one day, and he's in the bathroom trying to get his space, and I'm trying to get my space. And it's this little bitty bathroom, and I'm transported back to that moment. And I'm laughing to myself, thinking about saying to my abuser, dude, I am a girl. Okay. I need the bathroom space. You're going to need to move over. Give me my hair dryer. And I told my therapist, how can I think that way about him? Like, that's gross. Like, how can I still laugh about that or remember him fondly? Because if I say to you, oh, my ex-husband and I took the kids to Disney World one year and we had the best time riding nobody thinks you're crazy. But if you say, oh, my abuser and I did this one time and I laughed so hard, they think you're crazy because they don't understand how you could have loved somebody who abused you. And so when I said that to my therapist, she said, listen, this is one of the closest realms you get to familial abuse, okay? Because it's that mentoring relationship. They're in that in loco parentis role. She said, when you have a child who's abused by a parent, on Monday night, the parent's playing board games with them, right? On Thursday night, the parent's abusing them. You still have the board game parent. She said, children love their parents, even though they abuse them. This is the exact same thing. What he was to you wasn't abuse in that moment to you in your brain. And she goes, you get to keep those things. Like I have had to figure out how to mesh my 17-year-old self, who very much was in love with him, with the woman I am now, who knows he was a predator. And we also often hear people say, well, he was my favorite teacher. I don't want to think that about him. Or he was my friend. I can't believe that's true. Listen to me. If you're having a hard time believing that, if you're struggling to let go of the feelings you had for that teacher, how do you think we feel? Being loving that person and then realizing that they used our natural want for love and our normal sexual curiosity to prey on us and be able to sexually assault us over and over. It was one of the most excruciating parts of my journey, and it would come in waves. Things would happen. I remember being out running one day and thinking about the letter he wrote me. He wrote me a letter talking about going through the 5 stages of grief to get over me. And now, how it was just so difficult for him. And I can still see you in the hall. And that was in the letter. And he sent me that a year after I left him. He stalked me for a year after I left him. He'd call and leave messages on my answering machine until it ran out of tape. By the way, when you say that to kids, they have no idea what an answering machine is. Anyway, he would leave messages till it ran out of tape. He'd change drivers by my house for driver's ed just to see me. And he sent me this letter, and I'm out running years later when I finally figured out this is abuse. And I'm thinking about this letter, and I stop dead in the street and think, son of a bitch. That was even grooming. Like, that was part of the grooming process. He needed to send me that letter to instill that loyalty in me. And those things have just been parts of my journey. It's not a rapid stop. It's not like you wake up one day and go, oh, that wasn't love. Moving on. You have all these moments you spent with this person. And when I had to sit across from him at his deposition, it didn't hit me till 2 months later. He never looked at me once, not once. And it bothered me 2 months later. And I remember sitting there as a grown woman who now knows she's been abused, being a 17-year-old kid thinking, we spent 10 years together and you couldn't even look at me. I mean, I remember thinking that even in the state of mind I'm in now. I don't think people understand the damage that does. I think we need to look at domestic violence and see how much these women love these men and that they don't love that these men are abusing them. They've just been manipulated to think that that abuse is their fault.
Yeah.
That's the best way I can explain it.
So, for our listeners, they're going to be like 10 years. Yeah. So tell us about, how things progress. So it started at 14 and then 17. how what happened in those 10 years, and then what was your point where you're like, I can't do this anymore?
So he started grooming when I was 14. Like I said, my first sexual contact was 15. Had sex with me for the first time when I was 17. I truly thought when I graduated from high school, I wouldn't see him anymore. He actually had written in my yearbook to ICASAP, that was the college in his town. And I actually applied to go to school there. He wanted me to go to school in his town so he could continue to be with me, or so he said, which I still think now was part of that grooming process, instilling that loyalty.
Keeping
If you've got,
control.
yes,
Yeah.
keeping control of that
Yeah.
situation, because if you have a kid who truly thinks they've been in this love relationship, are they ever going to turn this person over for being a predator? So it is not uncommon for these abusers to keep their victims well into their 20s as long as they can keep that control. it, it's not uncommon for them to have children with their victims, because that really gives you
Yeah.
control, right? That really looks like that was a relationship and you loved that person. And even at the point where you may figure out that was abuse, there was a newscaster, a weathercaster in Texas who died by suicide. Her last post was about how this teacher had thrown off her life trajectory when he abused her. Her son had died the year before by suicide, and he was belonged to her teacher abuser. Like, that is such something so woven into you. How do you put somebody in jail who is the
Father of your
father
child.
or mother of your
Yeah.
child? Right. So what people don't understand is these people will continue to drag this on as long as they can to have that control. And what I recognized is they always ask me if I know the person, anybody else, did anybody else come forward? Right. Well, I know the person before me. And what's interesting as I look back now is she was in the school district before he came to ours. Two school districts before, because he was only at the school district before ours for a year and then he lost his job. They say for, somebody said for physically harming a child. I don't know, but we can only guess. So this girl actually came in and student taught at my school. So when I was a sophomore, so while he's grooming me, the student teacher that he was the teacher of in her high school, he's having sex with her in the school while he's grooming me. She's 21, 22, right? So then he's with me.
And he's married this
I
whole
s-
time too.
and
This
he's
yeah.
married this whole time. Yes. I stayed with him until I was 24. I mean, I was pretty much at his beck and call, thought this was love, wanted him to marry me. I even considered having a child with him and being a single parent because I thought this was the life I wanted, was to be with him. I loved him so much. And then when I was 24, I realized he was never going to be with me. And I wanted a family. That was the only reason. That was the reason I left him. I wanted a family. And he was never going to give that to me. So I told him that I needed to leave. I needed to explore and get away from him, and I wanted a family. And like I said, he stalked me for a year after that. My dad even had to call him and tell him to leave me alone. Like, my dad threatened him with the police. And the only reason I know my dad called him is because he called me to tell me that my dad had called him. And even when he called me that day, he said, "If you'll come back to me, I'll marry you." Years later, when I brought that up, he said, "I didn't mean that. I just said that." Once again, there's that control, right? We're trying to show that you do mean something to us. You were special. So that was, I left him in 95. My abuse was 85 to 89 in school. I left him in 95. He was accused of another student in 99.
Oh.
So that shows you that pattern, right? We're bringing one in, we're bringing one out, we're bringing one in, we're bringing one out. We're keeping all of these kids on a string so they're loyal to us, and they think that they were in this relationship with us, and they'll never think that this was abuse. I spent decades like that. And people made so much fun of it. I always thought I was to blame. Like, people talked about it very openly in my community. I remember my ex-husband was coaching football, and he was at a table with a bunch of football coaches from my high school, because I still lived back in my hometown. And I mean, he still taught there while I was living there, and I would see him at games, and my stepdaughter was in his driver's ed class. People are mortified by that, but I never thought for one moment. I always tell people, if that's not powerful to you, the fact that I truly thought I was special. He loved me. I never thought about him hurting my child because I didn't. think he was an abuser. I mean, that's not where my brain was. So my ex-husband was sitting at a table with other football coaches, and one of the kids from my high school came up and said that they thought, no, I'm sorry, one of the other football coaches came up and said to one of the kids from my school that they thought that my abuser should be in the Hall of Fame at the school district for having sex with that hot cheerleader for all those years. It was very widely discussed and made fun of. So I spent decades thinking I was the problem. I was the girl with the scarlet letter. I was the girl that tried to ruin a good man's career. That was said to me by my guidance counselor. You need to be quiet and quit crying. You're ruining a man's career. I mean, I spent decades like that. And then one day I was up at a school board meeting and we had a teacher who'd gotten a DUI and they wanted to fire him for the DUI. I'm not for DUIs. Don't get me wrong. I just felt like, this guy deserved a second chance. And we had people who'd gotten DUIs we hadn't fired. And I was, we just can't go willy nilly and do whatever we want. And I felt like I had a lot of influence at that time. I was the booster president. I'd been the PTA secretary, good friends with the superintendent. So I thought, found out later somebody said he only said he was nice to me so I wouldn't sue them. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what somebody said that he said. But I felt like I had a relationship and a friendship with that person, with the board members. They called me up and asked me to come defend that teacher. And I was standing outside with the group that wanted him fired. And one of the women said, "We don't need people like that around here in our district. We don't need teachers like that. He needs to move away from here and go get himself right before he can come back and be part of our community." Then she pointed at me and she said, "Kind of like you had to. You had to move away from here for a while and go away and come back before you could get yourself right and be part of our community." And I don't know why, but that was the moment. Like, and I've thought, why was that the moment so many times? I've gone over it in therapy. I just looked at that woman and I go, why do I keep getting blamed for this guy having sex with me and having an affair? Like, I don't understand why I keep getting blamed for this. He was the one that was married. My first instinct wasn't, this guy abused me. Why are you blamed? That was not my first instinct. My first instinct was, why is everybody keeping the blame on me and putting the scarlet letter on me? And I went home that night and I told my now ex-husband, this is what happened. And I go, God, I was 14 years old. And my ex-husband was like, what? It was kind of like a revelation moment for him. And I went to bed. And an hour later, I got up. And if you've never experienced trauma expelling from your body, you can't understand it. But I could not stop crying and I could not stop vomiting. My mind was like a movie. I could not turn it off. Every memory, every moment was just running through my brain all at one time. And so it began. That was how it began. And I really started to look at things in a different light and wonder. And I looked up and found Sesame and reached out. And Terry said, "Oh my gosh, you're just like Andrea." And she connected me with Andrea. And that started my journey. And it was a long and difficult and painful journey to get to where I am today. It truly was.
I think that, it's when you talk about the pain and you talk about the trauma, it's it is so real and so valid and so physical. I mean, it's not just in your heart. It like
No.
emanates throughout your body.
Yes.
And it's and that shame is debilitating. And when, oh God, it's just like when you told me what that woman said to you about, you had to go away to get right. I
Yes.
mean, it was like a stab through the heart because I know exactly. I did the same thing. I moved away. I
Yep.
came back.
Came back.
And people are like, "What are you doing
I went to
here?"
church and now I'm good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
I'm a
and it's
mom and
and I'm still blamed by many of my peers who are now
me too.
educators. They're
Me
now
too. Same thing.
educate. It's like,
Yes. Same thing.
and I so when so you came to that point, and I don't mean to age you again, but how old were you when you like talked to your ex-husband and this trauma began to really come out? How old were you then?
I was 44.
Okay, so that's yeah.
Yes, it's spot on. It really, really is. And if what's even more interesting about the moment of understanding, what's even more interesting to me is 10 years before that. 10 years before that, at the age of 34, I was asked to apply for a job at the district to be the cheerleading coach. The principal at the time asked me if I'd be the cheerleading coach. Now, keep in mind, he's the athletic director. He's going to be my boss. So, but I saw him all the time, and I'm just thinking this is a relationship I've been in. We had a breakup, blah, blah, blah. So she asked me to bring my resume to her, and I go to the school, and there's a track meet going on, and he's there. He's supervising. So I walk up, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And we talked, and I said, "Oh, so and so asked me if I'd take a job as a cheerleading coach." And he said, "Well, I'm not comfortable with that." And I was totally shocked. And I said, "Well, dumb me." In that moment, at 34 years old, I still believed he was carrying the torch. He was upset that I had left him, because he put on such a show when I left him, sobbing and begging me to stay. And I looked at him and I said, "CO, we're married. I'm married to somebody. I have kids. We gotta get past this. We gotta move on." And he said, "Well, I didn't get a principal's job because of you." And I looked at him and I go, "No, you didn't get a principal's job because you had sex with your students." But even at 34, I didn't see that as child abuse. I saw that as what he tried to sell me, that, he was married and it was unethical. And so I left the track and I went home and I sat down and I cried like a dang kid because he could still make me feel like a kid, right? Even though I didn't show him that.
And it
And I
was
went up to
your
the
fault. It
school.
was your
Yes, it
fault
was
he didn't
my
get that
fault.
job.
I was the reason he didn't get that job. I was the reason, ruining a good man's career. That had been stabbed into me for decades by people in my community that, I was the problem. I talk about lack of identity, loss of identity in my program, that I never got to form my own identity. I will forever be the tramp that had sex with the married teacher. That's who I'll always be to some people. I never got a chance to form my own identity. I remember calling my mom one day just sobbing, uh, maybe about 5, 6 years ago. I was listening to a song and it was We Were by Keith Urban. I can remember the song. And I called her and I'm sobbing and I go, "I don't remember who I was before him. Who was I before him? Can you tell me, can you tell me what I was like when I was a kid?" And then my mom's sobbing, But I went back to the school and I went to the principal and I said, "I can't take this job. I mean, this is what happened on the track last night." And I had a box of cards and letters that he'd written me, and I showed them to her. And I told her that he'd been having sex with me when I was in high school. And I said, "Listen, if he's going to have this much animosity towards me still because I left him, I don't think we can work with each other." That was the conversation. And she got up and she let me leave. And he was disciplined for harassing someone seeking employment with CUSD 16. He was disciplined for that, but he was allowed to continue to teach, was promoted to dean of students, retired a year later with a full pension and a standing ovation from the superintendent, who, by the way, in my case, my principal testified, and this is a public record, testified that my typing teacher came to him and told him that she just caught us, quote, "going at it" in the school locker room at the beginning of my senior year. And the principal's testimony was that he tried to catch us. When he didn't catch us, he believed that the relationship was happening from all the rumors he'd heard, but he still didn't call child services or the police at any point in time. He went to his superintendent, who is the same superintendent that stood up 16 years later and gave my abuser a speech thanking him for his years of service and mentoring to the students of CUSD 16 New Berlin. And he saluted him, and everybody came to their feet and gave him a standing ovation. I was in the room. But even in all those moments, I still felt like I was the problem. I was the aggressor. I was the initiator. I was ruining a man's career. And man, he could still instill that into me, couldn't he? He could still pull me back into that kid moment of being the 17-year-old kid standing in his office, listening to him say, "You wanted this, you asked for this. I thought you were mature enough for this relationship. Do you want to see me lose my job and be pumping gas for the rest of my life? How do you think my family's going to feel about this? If you can't keep your mouth shut, I'm going to have to leave you." I mean, that was where I always was until I was 44 years old. It took me that long and that moment to come to that realization. And you know, I'm not untypical.
Yeah.
52 is the average age of reporting.
Yeah, that's why I asked.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
you look at the power he had over you. So he's
Oh gosh.
the football coach, the athletic director. He could
Driver's ed.
driver's ed. He could get you flunked out of school. He
Yep.
could do all kinds of things to you. He had the ultimate power. Yet it's like, oh, you can ruin my life. I'll be pumping
Sure.
gas.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about your lawsuit. So when did you realize you could come forward and use the civil justice system, and how did that all work out?
So I was a legal assistant when I first got out of high school. For the first, for like 9 or 10 years, I worked for a medical malpractice attorney. And I never dealt with any of this. I dealt with medical malpractice. But I knew a lawyer because I'd worked for lawyers. So when I thought to myself, you know what, I want to see some kind of accountability from this. I mean, as I spoke up, things started to come out into my message box. People messaging me, this is what I knew, this is what I heard. I was seeing so much of what I didn't know. You know, and I felt like there needed to be some accountability for that. And if I'm blatantly honest here, I really just wanted my district to say they were sorry. I did. That's all I wanted. And when I couldn't get that from my community, from when I couldn't get that, I could tell that there was a culture. And as I did in the video I did yesterday, I talked about there's when you have a school system or any kind of institution, you have a certain structure. What we fail to understand is administrators come and go. Even when they fail, they come and go. And they're not usually from the area most of the time. Teachers come and go. Some of them may teach their whole career at one school, but most of the time they come and go and they're not from the same area. Your board comes and goes, right? There's only one constant, and it's the community. And your board is your community. And if your community has a culture that allows child abuse, and when I say that, victim blaming, silence, defending the predator, when you have a culture that is that kind of culture, predators are welcome into your school. And the cover-ups happen because the community is always there to defend the institution. So I just could feel that culture from my community and the way they were treating me. And I wanted accountability for the failures I knew were there. I didn't even know about some of the things I know about now. So I started looking into the statute, and I wasn't quite sure because it's really hard to read in Illinois. It's really, really difficult. And I just reached out to the lawyer I knew, and I simply said, this is when I was abused. This is when I discovered what happened to me. We have what's called a delay in discovery here in Illinois. And there's some argument over that. Like, some people say it's a delay in understanding what was wrong with you. Some people say it's a delay in actually understanding what happened. But my understanding was I was delayed in understanding this was even abuse. So how was I supposed to even know that these things that were going on with my body and my mind were due to the abuse? So I reached out, I gave them the dates, they came back, and because of my birthday, I was born in April. The statute always changed in January. So I never fell out. I never fell out when a new statute, because of the timing, I never fell out. I've just flowed right, like kicking a can down the road. I just flowed right into the next statute of limitations. So that's how my case was viable. And I always tell people, always check with a lawyer to see if your case is viable. Don't just get into a statute book and think you know. It's so confusing. You don't necessarily know. But the contention in my case from their side was there was a case here in Illinois 23 years ago called Clay versus Cool, where a girl had been abused by a priest. I believe Brother Cool was his name. And she said she knew what was happening to her at the time was bad. She was 7. She knew it was something bad. She didn't want it. But she didn't understand the mental effects it had had on her life. So that was her delay in discovery. But the appellate court said that the moment you turn 18, you should understand that an adult having sex with a child will cause problems. And you have 1 year from the date of your 18th birthday to file a claim. That's what the appellate court had said 23 years before. So that was my school's defense, that I should have known the minute I turned 18 that an adult having sex with a kid was wrong, and I should have come forward a year after. my 18th birthday. So that was the battle over those 7 years that I litigated.
So how was the litigation process? What happened throughout that?
Whenever people say to me that they want to bring accountability, my first thought is, and I say this to people, pump the brakes. Pump the brakes. I want accountability. I want institutions held accountable, but I need people to understand that not everybody makes it out of this alive. They just don't. It was horrific. It was dismantling. You need to have an incredibly strong support system if you're going to do that. You really, really do. I know that accountability, justice, whatever you want to call it, is incredibly important to survivors. I am grateful I got to get in the ring and fight. I am. I can't imagine what it'd be like to live with the rest of my life if they'd told me my time had expired and I had no chance. That would have been worse. But the justice system is unforgiving, is I guess what I want to say, and especially in the civil realm, because in the criminal realm, they're not allowed access to your sexual history, your psychiatric records, all of those things. When you're in a civil realm, and you can go to ICASA's website and it will tell you this in the little booklet. They talk about how a civil litigation is a completely different animal. They can have your sexual history, your tax returns, everything you've ever written down in your life in a journal, anything at all, your diaries when you're 5 years. I mean, they list everything these people can have. So it is unforgiving, but in the end, it's hard for me to answer this knowing my outcome now. You know what I'm saying? Like it's hard for me. I can say I'm glad I did it, but I think regardless of the outcome, I'd have been glad I did it because it was healing, even though it was horrific. Does that make sense? Like I had to go through all of those moments and that journey and walk that road to learn the things I learned that were excruciating to learn. Sitting in a room and listening to what people did or didn't do to help you as a child is eye-opening and it's painful, but it's healing because you also know that you didn't do anything wrong. That was the important part of the justice journey for me, was the healing aspect, the learning I didn't do anything wrong, and now having the absolute privilege I have of being able to speak in front of people and tell them my story with clarity and show them what this does to kids, how people fail kids, and what we need to do better. So it was something that was hard, but something I'm grateful for.
I think that's an important story to tell because and my litigation story was very very different. I was a part of a whole bunch of cases, so I didn't have to be deposed. I had none of that, and I think and sometimes I lose sight of the fact that, or I did not until recently, that all changed. Um, and I was pulled into another lawsuit that recently settled, and the Diocese of Orange and the high school I went to decided to crawl up every orifice I've ever had.
I read about
Yeah,
that.
and I was like, I'm not even a party to this
Not even a
case.
party to this.
Yeah, and
But you had to produce a bunch of things for that, didn't you? Like your own personal. Yes, because I when I saw that I was like, girl, I feel your pain. I mean, like I've put this on my Facebook before. It might I have an agreement in place, my settlement agreement, of course, but I said this online before anything came about in the agreement, but the statutory limit to depose somebody in Illinois is 4 hours. My school requested 40, I think,
oh,
and they were granted 30. They deposed me for 26 hours. I had 26 hours of depositions. So just all of those things, and here's the thing I want people to understand. We talk about how horrific it is from our side, but we also have a justice system that's built off of due process, right? We have a justice system that's built off of people being able to defend themselves. And I would always quote to people from the movie Philadelphia. I don't know if you've ever seen that. Denzel Washington and Tom Hanks. He's lost his job because he has HIV. So the woman who is working for the firm who's eliminated him because of HIV, she goes and questions him and asks him horrific questions that you think no human would ever have the guts to ask another human. And she goes back to sit down at the counsel table and she goes, God, I hate this case. God, I hate this case. I just, there is, this can't be easy for anybody in the realm of what's happening. You know what I'm saying? Like It's just a difficult progression all around for people who are the collateral damage of what predatory people have done and people who enable them have done. And unfortunately, I'm not defending enabling it in any way at all, but there's a lot of people out there. I had one woman that said that the reason she was willing to be deposed or that she came forward was because of what she had to live with for 30 years. Like, I've had to live with what we did for this to this kid for 30 years. That's collateral damage. It is. Whether you figured it out in the moment or you figured it out 30 years later, you're suffering with a predator's actions. I'm in no way condoning enabling or that people didn't act. But I'm saying that there is a trail of damage that is left behind from these people's actions. It's not just the kid who gets abused.
Well, you're describing a catastrophic atom bomb that went off. So
Hmm.
we have, what happened to you. We have the community that was hurt and people who for
Yep.
years later are saying, "Oh,
Yes.
because of what you did." We have your family who is
Yes.
totally changed by all this. We have his family.
His family.
Yeah,
Yep.
we have his friends. We have your peers who saw this. We
Yes.
have all the enablers. Everyone whose lives were hurt and shattered because this guy was a predator. Now, so he was retired when you came forward.
Yes.
And I'm assuming there was no criminal remedy for you at
My
all.
my
Yeah.
my criminal statute had passed, and I do bring that up in my presentation. I tell people my criminal statute. I was doing a presentation for sixth graders, and a sixth grade kid asked me if I'd put my abuser in prison. I'm like, wow, that's a heavy question for a sixth grade kid. And I explained to them I wasn't able to go criminal because of my statute, but I was able to go civil. And then I do tell my audience, I did not say this to sixth graders, but I'm going to say it to you. Civil actions are incredibly important to accountability. They hold everyone accountable who enabled and allowed that abuse, and they hold a culture accountable, an institution. Sometimes institutions will absolutely sacrifice kids to save their wallet and their image. And if you're not going to do right by people just to do right by people, you have to be forced to do right by people. And that's why civil litigations matter. And I tell them $500 million will ensure that Michigan State never has another Larry Nassar again, won't it? Because there was that accountability there. So but it is a huge upheaval of, man, when you mentioned my peers, just one peer who she was just not nice to me, just like was not nice to me at all. She thought he was the bomb. And when I filed my lawsuit, people came at me like crazy. I mean, like, there was comments on my lawsuit was in the front page of the Springfield, Illinois paper, and the comments on it were, I didn't read them. My friends read them and they screenshot them because I didn't want to do it to myself. But later I had to see them because I sent them to my lawyer. Awful. Bros before hoes. Looks like she was effing him then and she's trying to eff him now for his money. I mean, just every horrible thing you can think of. And she got on there and she defended me, and I was not prepared for it, but her statement, she's an educator now, her statement was one of the most beautiful things I've ever read, and I've read it to my audience. She talked about how everybody knew this was wrong, everybody knew what was going on was wrong, we all knew it was wrong and we knew it was, and then big letters she put her. I mean, like, everything she said was me. We knew she was the problem. No, she said, I never heard one person ever say that he was doing something wrong. And she talked about how this changed their life trajectory, how it changed their perception, how there were kids who admired him so much as their coach, who have struggled so much with this. It's life changing for so many people.
Yeah. So let's talk about the work that you do now. Before we started this recording, you were telling me about some of the presentations that you do, and it was just like so amazingly gripping and powerful that I really want the audience here to get a taste of that, because we've spent the last 50 minutes talking about abuse and the horrible things that happen to you, but let's talk about what you have now done with that and how you're making sure that doesn't happen to anyone else.
Well, it's an interesting story. 2 years into my litigation, my husband, who is a superintendent of schools, by the way, people are like blown away by that. He said to me, "This is killing you." I mean, like, I was so caught up in it. It was literally killing me physically. He said, "You need a distraction." So he put a whiteboard in our basement, an 8-foot whiteboard, and he said, "Put your story on that." And I still have the picture. And I did it with dry erase marker. And I just started writing down the steps of grooming, and I started weaving my story into each step and things that had happened. And then other things that had come about as I went along with other predatory teachers that had been possibly in there's been several alleged predators in the halls of my school. And I started talking about those instances and what we see at steps 1 through 3. We see a mentoring relationship. We see somebody who cares about kids. We don't want to think anything bad's happening. And then at step 4, when the kid's being isolated, we see them as the aggressor. We see them as the problem. And I put an example on my whiteboard of a current situation that was going on. When I called back, what all they said about him was, well, he's popular. All the kids love him. Did you know he was student teacher of the year? I mean, all of these things. And then what do they say about her? Well, she's a slut. Do you know how many boys she's had sex with? She's a known drama queen. She seeks out his attention. So I started shoving that all onto a whiteboard, and there was a lot of erasing and putting it back again. And I'd do the video for myself, and my husband would watch it and be like, no, that's a little too much hate. I mean, like I had to get some of that anger out. A therapist in the area, shout out to Amber Schweda, a therapist in the area, she asked if she could see me do it in the basement. And she came to my basement and she said, Michelle, we have to get this out of your basement. Like this is going to set the world on fire. And I go, okay, but how will I carry my whiteboard? I mean, I never made a Google slide. What am I going to do? So I put it on a Google slide and I interviewed at the Rape Crisis Center for a prevention educator job. I got the job and I started going into schools here for free, just giving this presentation to their staff because Faith's law mandates that you have to be trained on grooming and sexual misconduct. And I did it at the principals conference. And one principal said, I will pay you a certain amount to come to my school and do it. And I was like, oh, okay, this is great. So I took the day off, did it. His resource officer was there in the room. And the resource officer said to me, would you mind doing our conference? The Illinois resource officer is the one I'm writing the new keynote for. Okay, how much will you charge? And it was this minuscule little amount. Like if I told you right now, you would laugh. So I go there and I finished the presentation. And the president walks up to me. There's 215 cops in the room and administrators. And he goes, did you know who was in the room today? And I go,
No.
no. And he goes, you really didn't know who was here today? I'm like, my gosh, is the president of the United States here? I mean, like, what is happening? And it was the director, director of the National Association of School Resource Officers. And he goes, he's coming for you right now. As he's coming for me, another person comes up to me and asks if I'll speak at their conference. And he asked me how much I was charged. And I'm like, oh, this much, like this tiny little.
Yeah.
And the other guy gets behind me and he goes, nope, that's not what we're doing anymore. He's like, that's nope, nope. So he asked me if I would keynote for the National Association of Resource Officers. And I was their keynote 2 years ago in July in Phoenix. And there was 1,800 cops in the room. And from there, I was Safe and Sound Schools, which their co-founder, her daughter was one of the 26 souls lost at Sandy Hook. She heard about me and they saw me speak and they asked me to be an exclusive speaker for their speakers bureau. And they just send people all over the country to talk about school safety. So I have been blessed and privileged to take my story and my message out to hundreds of schools all over the country and safety conferences and been to Canada. And I'm writing a new keynote calling Be a Difference in a Survivor's Life, showing people the misconceptions we have, the things we do right now that stop us from being able to support. Like this is for the Illinois resource officers, and they want to know how to support survivors of sexual violence in their realm and how teachers should and administrators. So before I show you how to support, I have to show you why you failed to support. And the places we failed to support are those indoctrinated views we have. Wish I had teachers like that when I was growing up. Those kind of things. I need to point those things out. Victim blame and victim shaming. We're going to go through all of that, and then we're going to show how you can do better by a survivor. The current one I do is called Grooming 101, a Predator's Playbook. And I break my story down as I teach them about grooming. And the second one I do is called Grooming and Sexual Violence, It Is Your Business. And that one is like a half day PD or a full day I do for law enforcement that breaks down what to look for, what the misconceptions are, who's at risk, and what those misconceptions are. There's so many misconceptions, so many. What to look for, stress in the home. Good golly, if you have kids, I mean, you was poor, you was tired, you was a parent, you've got stress in the home. I mean, every risk factor could cover any kid in the United States. So I break all that down and we really talk about where parents are failing when it comes to communicating about this and where people are failing when it comes to communicating about this. We fail in certain areas.
So I'm not going to have you give your presentation here because people the goal here is to have you do your presentation. But like what are like the what's the one thing when you go and present that you want your listeners to take home with them?
You know, I was thinking about this earlier today. Like what it I don't know if I can name one thing. There's thoughts that I have. I want people to understand. Once again, we go back to this is never the fault of a kid. It is never okay for an adult to have sex with a child. They should not want to have sex with a kid. And I really drive that home at the end. I really drive it home about how we make these kids raise their hand to go pee, and we say all these things to kids when it's convenient for us, they're mature enough, but when it's not convenient for us, they're not mature enough. But I think there's so many things that are important. There's not just one thing. What's important is we do see that steps 1 through 3 sometimes is absolutely grooming. You have got an educator who's spending a lot of time one-on-one with a kid. You may have a problem and you need to assess that situation. We have threat assessment in our schools when it comes to school shootings, and that's a very fast moving thing. When you think there's a threat, you assess, you bring your team together, you do all these things. You bring the person in, you do interviews, you talk about things. And in my new presentation, one of the questions I ask on a slide is I'm going to ask you a question that's going to be pretty sensitive. If somebody came up to you today and said, if a teacher came up to you and said, I saw one of my colleagues getting out of his car this morning with a gun, would you stop for 2 minutes and think, if I proceed, is this going to ruin this person's life? I mean, would you think that? Would you think that at all? Or would you just proceed with assessing the situation and doing what you needed to do? It's important for people to understand that this is an act of violence being perpetrated against our children that we lose a lot of people to. Okay. We lose a lot of people to suicide from this, and we lose people because their bodies cannot take the stress anymore. It is our duty to assess that situation, no matter how uncomfortable we are with it, because we wouldn't fail to assess in other situations. I think it's important that we see what's going on at all stages of this. We act, we listen, we don't just look away. I think that's important. But the other thing I think that's important for us to understand, there is such a myth out there this only happens to bad kids with bad parents. And that is not true at all. I had a two-parent household. I had good parents. Faith had a two-parent household. My friend Heather had a two-parent household. All of our parents have been,
Two parent
yes,
household? Yeah.
yes. All of our parents had been married over 50 years. Honor roll students, athletes, the good kids. I want people to think about this in the realm of who they're picking. If you have a kid who's a little bit of a rebel and has had to stand on their own because they're the kid that nobody cares for at home and they're very vocal and they're a little bit of a pain in the butt, do you think that's the kid you're going to be able to keep quiet? Or do you think you're going to be able to keep the compliant kid quiet? The kid who's been taught that, they're supposed to be the good kid. The kid who's out there who does have a loving environment, who knows what love looks like, and you can draw them in with love. These people are using kindness, care, and concern to abuse our children. The very things we've taught our kids are good. We sit in rooms and we teach our kids about bad touch and what feels uncomfortable, and that they'll know it's uncomfortable and they should report. These people are not using things that are making our kids uncomfortable. What is important for us to understand is abuse is not always fearful. Some people use love to abuse, and rape is not always violent. Some people can actually just manipulate a kid into consenting to their own sexual violation by using the things we've taught our kids are good. And if I had one thing to say to parents, there is no one listening to this that has good communication with your kids. There's not. I'm sorry. But once again, nobody knows everything their kids are doing. That doesn't mean you're a bad parent. It means you're just a kid. I mean, that's normal for kids. And we as adults are looking at what we don't want our kids to do from our adult brain instead of from the brain of when we were a kid and the things that we did. And we have a tendency to say this: don't put your drink down at a party. Don't go walking alone. Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't. We just hammer don't home. Sit down with your kids and flip the narrative. Say something a little more simple like, if you're going to walk home from so and so's tonight, make sure you bring a friend. Just take the don't out of it. If you do go to that party, get your own drink. Just take don't out of it. Because if you tell your child don't repeatedly all the time about things they should not be doing and something bad happens to them, do you think they're going to tell you?
No, because they broke a rule.
Yep, they know they did something wrong. And where I got that from was working with kids. I started to ask kids a series of questions. How many of you in here have heard a safe adult say, well, she must like it because she keeps going back to him? And 80% of the kids in the room raised their hand every time. 80% of kids had heard somebody blame somebody for their own physical abuse. And then I said, how many of you have heard a safe adult say, well, if she hadn't been wearing that, that wouldn't have happened. Or if he hadn't gone there, that wouldn't have happened. 80% of kids raised their hand at that every time. They'd heard a safe adult blame somebody for their sexual violation. And then I said, how many of you in this room have heard a safe adult say, we know we don't have to worry about that with you, though. We know we raised you better than that. We know better than that. We know that we don't have to worry about that because you have more values than that. 100% of kids in the room raised their hand to that every time. Their parents had said that in some capacity or another. And I then said to kids, so tell me what happens when something bad happens and your parents have said that to you. And I'll never forget it, a senior boy sitting in the front, he looked right past me. That's when I knew. He said, we're not going to tell our parents because we know they're going to be disappointed in us because we should have known better. We were raised better. I wish my mom was in the room right now. I'll never forget that. Like it got me right in the gut as a parent of all the mistakes I'd made with my kids and telling them don't and telling them what not to do. And I know they'd never do that. We are sometimes in our best intention miscommunicating with our kids. And I think what's most important for them to understand is we know they're human. We know they're kids. We know they're going to make mistakes. We also need to tell them that no matter what happens, they could be doing all the right things
Yeah.
and something horrible could happen. But even if they do make that mistake, I think the thing we don't sit down and say is, there is nothing on the face of this earth that could ever make me so disappointed in you that I would not love you anymore. If something bad happens, pick up the phone, call your mom, call your dad. I said that when we dropped my stepdaughter off at college. I needed her to know, yes, these are the things I need you to watch out for. But no matter what, we are here for you and we love you, no matter what. I think we get so caught up in parenting, we forget to show love and compassion. And I think that that's a message that's missing with our kids. I failed at it.
Yeah. I'm sitting here all
Yeah.
choked up. I'm like, I failed at it too.
Well, a mom came up to me crying in Chicago, like sobbing. And she said, my precious daughter, we were best friends. We shopped together every weekend. We did everything together. She came up to me and let me know she was raped 10 years after the rape. She was raped in high school. And when I asked her why she didn't tell me in high school, she said, because you always said I was a really good girl. And I thought that if I told you that, you'd think I did something wrong. We need to communicate to them that nothing will ever matter, that they've never done anything wrong in these instances. And we need to communicate that people use love to abuse, use love to hurt. I mean, I think about Gabby Petito. Do you think her parents would have ever let her travel the country with somebody they thought was going to kill her? Absolutely not. They did not see that isolation. We are not educating our families, our educators, our children. It is so uncomfortable for us. And we need to get comfortable because this touches more people than most of the things we are comfortable talking about. Your odds of being killed in a school shooting are around 1 in 2 million. But on any given day, it could happen at our school, so we don't mind scaring our kids a little, right? And teaching them what to look for. Your odds of being abused by a teacher, 1 in 10. Your odds of being abused as an athlete, 1 in 4. We're not. Well, they says USA Safe Sports says 1 in 4 athletes have been sexually assaulted or harassed in their sports, 65% citing a coach or trainer. Thousands of kids have been abused in the church. How many were abused in the Boy Scouts? The things we're comfortable training for, talking about, understanding. Those are the things that they're important. They're important. Stop the bleed trainings are important. I'm married to a superintendent, but we have kids bleeding out from mental health issues in our hallway. And violence begets violence. And if we're not willing to talk about what those mental health issues are and what's causing them, they are the pathway to violence that we are trying to stop. The exact thing we're trying to stop is the stuff we're not comfortable talking about the pathway to. And that's what I think is incredibly important.
Michelle, you've blown me away today.
Even with my voice, even with my
Even with
frog
your
voice.
even with your voice, you have blown me away. I mean, I've teared up, I've gotten the gut punch, I've questioned my own parenting.
That's okay.
I
I do too all
know
the
it's
time.
it's fine.
I do too. We learn and we grow. And once again, Gabby Petito's parents did nothing wrong. It's parenting is hard, and we've been taught to parent the way we've been taught to parent. And I would love to show people the lens from. And when I have people leave, they go having a lot of conversations tonight when I get home, and I'm like, well, I learned this from kids. I didn't learn it from parenting. Trust me, I've made plenty of mistakes in my parenting. We could go on and on about my son and the struggles he's gone through and where he is now. And he's in a great place now. But man, there was a time I didn't think he was going to make it. I mean, he was suicidal. And I've made tons of mistakes, especially parenting in trauma, right? So many of us are parenting our kids in trauma without even understanding we're in trauma. We're carrying that backpack of trauma around, and it affects how we parent, how we work, everything we do. We bring a candy cart around our jobs thinking that's going to solve the cultural problem, when the real cultural problem is we're triggered from everything that's gone on in our life. If we just dealt with trauma, we'd have half the problems. But most people just are parenting the way they're taught. And I've learned where I messed up from talking to kids without parents being present. It's been eye-opening. It really, really is. I love it. I love kids. Now, on a side note to end on humor, because this has been heavy, I had a little girl that said to me one time, I asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up. She was 5. I was doing body safety. She goes, well, Mrs. Denault, when I grow up, I want to be a doctor. When I was littler, she's 5. When I was littler, I wanted to be a veterinarian. But I realized I didn't like to see animals in pain. I'm okay when humans are in pain. I was like, okay, serial killer. I mean, should I worry about this kid later? Working with little people is so awesome. But working with big kids has taught me so much about what we do, teaching them to fit in, making them do this sport, making them do that thing. My youngest son quit the band when he was a junior, and I go, what? You love the band. And I tell this story to kids. And my junior goes, no, mom, you love the band. So we're doing what we can. We're doing the best we can. But kids have taught me how we can do better. And I hope parents will always take that message.
Ugh. So, Michelle, people are going to want to contact you after hearing this. How do they find you?
You
Where's
think?
the
Well, but even with my frog voice, they'll probably be like, wow, that lady sounds like a, she sounds crazy. My website is michelledenault.com. It's that simple. And if anybody wants to look into the presentation, that's all there. If they want to look further into how to book the presentation, they can go to safeandsoundschools.org. That's their website, is where they have the information on how to book me. You book straight through them. My website, you can send messages to me. I will always answer you. Now, when I give a presentation, I actually give my personal cell phone number. I do. I give it to my audience. And the reason I do that is because I offer survivors a chance to stand up and be recognized at the end. And I want people who to understand, who maybe didn't stand up, that this inbox and this phone is open. And I am not going to ever turn away a message from a survivor, because I know what it was like to be on the other end of a phone without anybody there. So if you reach out to me today via my Facebook is Michelle Denault. A lot of people reach me there, by my website, anything, and you need to talk. I am not afraid to give out my personal cell phone number. I want people to know this is a safe space to come, a confidential space. I always tell people, I will sit with you for as long as you need to sit, but when you're ready to stand and draw your sword, I'll be your shield. Because I know I've done this. I'll take the hits for you. So I just want people to know this is a place to come that's safe. If you're ready to disclose, I'll be there with you. If you never are, I'll just be your source of support. So, and if you need a presentation, please, everybody, have this in your schools. Stop setting people down at a computer and letting them walk away and do a billboard, because that's what they do. I've worked in a school. I don't need to know about bloodborne pathogens. They walk away, and then they do their billboard, and they come back and they take the 10-question quiz till they pass. Stop doing that in this area. Have training in. Your school lawyer is there to protect your district, not to protect your kids. So have training in that shows people what grooming looks like, that reaches them on an emotional level, that wants to give them the ability to help kids do better by kids today. And I'm not plugging for myself. I'm just plugging for
Yeah.
let's do better.
Michelle, thank you so much. And if this, to the listeners, if this conversation challenged what you thought you knew about grooming, that's the point. Prevention starts with understanding how abuse begins, not just how it ends. And to learn more, access resources, or support the work, all of Michelle's information will be in the show notes. You can also go to the NC Sesame website at ncsesame.org. And if this episode mattered to you, and I hope it did, please share it. And a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts will really allow us to be seen and heard by more people. And these conversations are how we change systems and protect kids. I'm Joelle Casteix, and this is Crossing the Line. Thank you so much.